The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the distant hills when I pulled my pickup truck to the edge of the lake on my newly acquired ranch. The peaceful glimmer of the water under the early light was everything I had dreamed of when I purchased the property. It had taken years of saving, planning, and negotiating to secure this perfect slice of land, complete with its own private lake surrounded by tall pines and rolling meadows. I set up my modest campsite on the shore, unrolled my sleeping bag, inside the canvas tent, and started a small fire pit for cooking breakfast. The ranch was my sanctuary, a place to escape from the chaos of city life, unwind, and reconnect with nature. But little did I know, my peaceful weekend retreat would ignite a storm with the neighboring HOA that would escalate into a battle neither of us had anticipated. As I sipped my coffee and listened to the birds chirping, I noticed a white SUV, slowly approaching down the gravel road. It was unusual because my property was clearly marked with private property signs, and I had installed a sturdy gate at the main entrance. Curious, I stood up and waited as the vehicle pulled closer. The SUV came to a halt, and a woman in her late 50s stepped out, wearing designer sunglasses, a perfectly ironed blouse, and a scowl that could curdle milk. She marched toward me with a clipboard in hand, her heels crunching against the gravel. "Good morning," I greeted politely, trying to mask my unease. "Can I help you?" "I'm Barbara, president of the Willow Creek HOA," she announced with an air of authority. "You are not authorized to camp here." I raised an eyebrow. "This is my property, ma'am. I purchased this ranch 3 months ago." Barbara sniffed, looking down her nose at me. "The lake is part of the Willow Creek community. According to HOA regulations, unauthorized camping, fires, or recreational activities are strictly prohibited unless approved by the board." I shook my head, already feeling the frustration bubbling. "Again, this is my private property. The lake is entirely within my boundary lines confirmed by the county and my property deed." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "The previous owner had an arrangement with the HOA allowing access. That agreement still stands." "That agreement was voided when I purchased the land," I explained firmly. "I own the lake and the surrounding property outright. There are no easements or shared rights." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." Without another word, she spun around, got back into her SUV, and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming she would verify the facts and drop the matter, but I underestimated her resolve. That afternoon, as I was casting a fishing line into the calm waters, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Moments later, 2 sheriff's department vehicles pulled up near my campsite. 2 deputies stepped out, looking serious but not hostile. "Good afternoon, sir," one deputy said as he approached. "We received a call from the Willow Creek HOA reporting unauthorized activity on this property." I figured as much. I sighed. "Look, officers, I own this land. Here are my property, documents and deed." I handed over the neatly organized folder I had prepared for situations just like this. The deputies reviewed the documents carefully, cross-referencing the legal descriptions and maps. "Everything seems to be in order," the deputy confirmed. "You're within your rights to camp here." "Thank you," I said, relieved but annoyed. "Barbara from the HOA seems to believe otherwise." The deputy nodded. "We'll inform her that this is a civil matter, and as far as law enforcement is concerned, you're not breaking any laws." I watched as the deputies returned to their vehicles and drove back the way they came, no doubt headed straight to Barbara to deliver the news she wouldn't want to hear. But if I thought that would be the end of it, I was sorely mistaken. Over. The next week, I received a barrage of letters from the HOA demanding I cease all activity on the property. They claimed that the lake was part of a recreational easement historically used by the community and insisted I allow residents continued access. I responded each time with legal documentation proving their claims were baseless. Frustrated, Barbara escalated her tactics. One morning, I discovered several HOA members trespassing on my land, setting up lounge chairs and picnic tables by the lake as if it were their personal clubhouse. I approached them calmly but firmly. "You're trespassing. This is private property." One man waved dismissively. "We've used this lake for years. You can't just change that." "Actually, I can and I have," I replied, pulling out my phone. "Leave. Now, or I'll have the sheriff escort you off the property." They grumbled, but eventually packed up and left. That evening, I called my attorney, James, who specialized in property law. After reviewing the situation, he was equally frustrated. "They have no legal standing," James reassured me. "If they continue, we'll file a cease and desist followed by a lawsuit for harassment and trespassing." But Barbara wasn't finished. She filed a frivolous lawsuit claiming historical usage rights, attempting to tie me up in court and drain my resources. Fortunately, James was ready. At the preliminary hearing, he presented overwhelming evidence that the HOA's claims were unfounded. The judge swiftly dismissed their case, warning the HOA against further legal harassment. However, Barbara's stubbornness knew no bounds. One morning, I woke up to find construction crews on my property. Without any notice, they were attempting to build a path around the lake, allegedly to restore community access. Furious, I confronted the foreman. "Who authorized this?" "The Willow Creek HOA," he said nervously. "We were told they owned the lakefront access." "They don't," I snapped. "Stop work immediately." The crew hesitated but ultimately complied when I threatened to call law enforcement. Once again, I called James, and within hours we filed for an emergency injunction. The court granted the order, halting any further activity by the HOA on my property. But the battle was taking its toll. I was constantly defending my rights against an HOA that refused to accept reality. Then came the breaking point. One weekend, as I returned to my ranch, I discovered that Barbara had organized a massive HOA Lake Day event on my property without permission. Dozens of residents were gathered, canoes in the water, barbecues sizzling, and loudspeakers blaring music. It was a blatant act of defiance. I didn't hesitate. I called the sheriff, who arrived with multiple deputies. This time, the officers were less diplomatic. They began issuing citations for trespassing, and several HOA board members were detained for violating the court's injunction. Barbara herself was handcuffed and placed in a squad car, her face flushed with rage. "You think you've won?" she screamed at me from the back seat. "This isn't over." But it was. The sheriff's department and county prosecutors took the matter seriously. Barbara and several HOA members faced criminal charges for trespassing, vandalism, and contempt of court. Meanwhile, I pursued a civil lawsuit for damages and legal fees. In the weeks that followed, the HOA's reputation crumbled. Residents who had previously supported Barbara distanced themselves, recognizing the financial and legal nightmare she had created. The county eventually ruled that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property and invalidated any prior informal agreements that predated my ownership. Barbara was removed from her position as HOA president, and several board members resigned in disgrace. At the final hearing, the judge ruled decisively in my favor. The HOA was ordered to pay substantial damages and permanently prohibited from entering or interfering with my property. Barbara, humiliated and financially ruined, was forced to sell her home to cover legal costs. The new HOA leadership approached me with sincere apologies, vowing to operate within the boundaries of their authority from that point forward. Standing once again on the shore of my peaceful lake, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. The long and bitter battle was finally over. The land was mine, free and clear, and justice had been served. But as I watched the sun set over the still waters, I couldn't help but wonder what new challenges might arise in the world of suburban politics. For now, though, the ranch was quiet, the lake was calm, and my campsite remained untouched. a hard-won sanctuary from the madness that had once threatened to consume it. After the final hearing, when the judge's gavel struck and justice was served, I had hoped my battle with the Willow Creek HOA was finally over. The lake was peaceful again, the ranch untouched, and for the first time in months I could enjoy my property without the constant threat of harassment. But as with any storm, sometimes the worst damage appears after the skies clear. Word of Barbara's downfall spread like wildfire throughout the community. Her resignation and public disgrace had left a vacuum within the HOA. The board scrambled to stabilize, appointing an interim president, Mr. Fletcher, who presented himself as a reasonable man, eager to rebuild the HOA's broken reputation. He reached out to me, requesting a meeting. Skeptical but curious, I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a small diner in town. Fletcher was polite and apologetic, acknowledging the misdeeds of his predecessor. "We want to start fresh," he said, stirring his coffee nervously. "We understand the HOA overstepped, and we fully respect your property rights now." I nodded, cautious but willing to listen. "I appreciate the sentiment, but trust will take time." "Of course," Fletcher replied. "We would simply like to establish clear boundaries and communication channels to avoid any further misunderstandings. We drafted a mutual agreement that reaffirmed my full ownership and barred the HOA from making any future claims to the lake or my property. For a time, things were quiet. But peace, as I had learned, was fragile. A few months later, I noticed new faces around the lake. They weren't HOA members, but contractors, surveyors to be exact, measuring land along the shoreline adjacent to my property. Curious and slightly concerned, I approached them. "Afternoon, gentlemen. May I ask what you're surveying?" One of the men glanced at his clipboard. "We've been hired by the county for a proposed public access initiative." My stomach tightened. "Public access? To what exactly?" "The county is exploring options for developing recreational facilities near the Willow Creek area," he explained. "Part of that involves reassessing public easements and lake accessibility." My mind raced. Had the HOA lobbied the county after losing in court? Was this their new tactic? I called James immediately. "We need to look into this." Within days, James uncovered troubling information. Though the HOA was officially barred from interfering, several disgruntled former board members had quietly petitioned the county, proposing that portions of my lake be designated as public access to benefit the broader community. "They're trying to backdoor you through the county," James said grimly. "It's legally dubious but politically slippery." I decided to act quickly. I gathered documentation proving my uninterrupted ownership, detailed property maps, and the court rulings that solidified my rights. James arranged a meeting with county officials to present our case before any decisions were made. The meeting was tense. County supervisors listened as I laid out my position, highlighting the HOA's previous harassment, the court rulings, and the financial damages I had suffered. James emphasized the dangerous precedent it would set to allow an HOA's vendetta to influence public policy. To my relief, the county eventually sided with us. They acknowledged the private ownership and halted any plans for public access development. However, the fight had reignited old tensions within Willow Creek. Rumors spread that I had robbed the community of its cherished lake access. Some residents viewed me as a villain, while others sympathized with my plight. Tensions escalated again one night when I discovered tire tracks near the gate leading to my property. Someone had attempted to force the gate open, leaving it slightly ajar. I installed additional security cameras and reinforced the gates, determined not to let intimidation shake me. The following week, things took an unexpected turn. Barbara returned. Word had spread that she was back in town, living temporarily with a friend after selling her home. One afternoon, as I was inspecting my fence line, a familiar white SUV appeared once more. Barbara stepped out, her face hardened, but composed. "You got lucky," she said coldly, "but you won't always have the courts on your side." I don't need luck, I replied calmly. I have the law, she smirked. We'll see how long that lasts. Her veiled threat lingered in the air as she drove off. Determined not to be reactive, I continued reinforcing my property's defenses. But Barbara's reappearance emboldened a small faction within the HOA who still resented my ownership. I soon discovered their next ploy. They filed noise complaints, alleging that my occasional use of ATVs and boats on the lake disrupted the peace of the neighborhood. Though these complaints were minor, they were relentless. The local authorities were obligated to investigate each report, consuming my time and adding to my frustration. James, ever resourceful, helped file counterclaims for harassment and frivolous complaints. The county grew tired of the back and forth, and eventually imposed fines on the HOA for wasting public resources. But the HOA's faction wasn't done yet. Their final desperate move came in the form of an attempted land swap proposal secretly introduced at a county zoning meeting. They suggested that if I relinquished a small portion of shoreline, the HOA would formally drop all claims and lawsuits permanently. What they failed to anticipate was that I had already bought additional adjacent parcels, extending my boundary even further. At the zoning meeting, I presented my expanded deeds. The room fell silent as I revealed that not only did I control my original property, but I now owned the parcels bordering the community clubhouse itself, the very heart of the HOA's operations. The stunned silence broke into murmurs. The HOA leadership was cornered. Their bluff had backfired spectacularly. "This is over," I declared, my voice firm. "Any further actions against me or my property will result in immediate legal action. The HOA has no standing, no leverage, and no more tricks to play." Within weeks, the remaining dissidents within the HOA either resigned or were voted out by fed-up residents. A new board was formed, comprised of level-headed individuals who wanted peace and stability rather than ongoing battles. Yet, as calm settled, I realized that I needed to rebuild not only my land's defenses, but my community's trust as well. I hosted an open house at my ranch, inviting neighbors to see the property and the lake for themselves. We shared food, stories, and laughter around bonfires, slowly mending fences, both literal and metaphorical. Soon local kids were fishing along the shore under my watchful eye, and older residents admired the tranquility of the ranch without the interference of HOA politics. The lake became a symbol of resilience, not contention. At long last, the storm had passed completely. My lakefront ranch stood unchallenged, my property rights secured by multiple court rulings, public records, and overwhelming community exhaustion, with the HOA's past behavior. On a bright spring morning, I stood once more by my campfire beside the lake, the reflection of the clear sky shimmering across the water. There were no angry HOA officials, no lawsuits, no threats, only the tranquil peace I had dreamed of when I first purchased the land. The long war with the HOA had taught me patience, resilience, and the importance of standing your ground. As I cast my fishing line into the still waters, I finally felt what true ownership meant. Not just of land, but of peace hard-earned and fully deserved.